Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our podcast, The Researchers Roundtable. In this episode, we will talk to Dr. Sam Amsbury, a lecturer at University of Sheffield. Sam works on plant cell wall, and he will share his passion for science.
So, for quite a long time, when I was a really little kid, I was really interested in sort of science and ecology and pollution.
And his journey to become a lecturer at University of Sheffield.
I'd say it's been quite a steep learning curve. So I was very fortunate. I finished my PhD and lined up.
He shares his experience during his early career research fellowship.
I think your grant has to be focused. Your proposal has to have, you can't
And how does Sam unwind himself?
have the weekend to do whatever I want to do. Go and see friends. I've got an allotment. I go and garden. Take time.
There is much more to learn from Sam's journey, from undergrad to PhD, from postdoc to current lecturership.
A good example of having work-life balance, because I feel like those sorts of things have to come from the top. If your PI works all the time, it is always in it.
So stay tuned to learn more.
Welcome to our show, Sam. Can you tell me about your current position in the Sheffield?
So at Sheffield, I'm a lecturer, but I've just started that position in January. So I was on an early career fellowship before that.
Yeah.
And when that rolled to the end, I was lucky that Sheffield were recruiting. So I applied for a lecturer job and have just started that.
Oh, that's nice. So I will start this conversation with, again, like when it inspired you to come to science as a child, or what time you realized I need to go for the science?
So for quite a long time, when I was a really little kid, I was really interested in sort of science and ecology and pollution. My parents were quite interested in that. And then I sort of lost interest in it through my teenage years. And towards the end of school, I became really interested in biology. I had a really inspirational biology teacher. So I applied for a biology degree at university. So that's really my kind of origin story in science. And then while I really enjoyed my degree, so that's when I decided I kind of want to stay in this area and keep doing that.
Yeah. So you did your master from Sheffield, or?
I didn't do a master's. So I did my degree at Manchester first in biology, and then I transitioned to plant science during that. And then I did a PhD in Sheffield.
Yeah.
And then went away a bit to work in Leeds, and then I've been in Sheffield ever since.
Okay, so I will start again with the PhD. What was the topic? Means what we were working on? Like how you come to like I need to go for this, scientist to work with.
Well, there's a mix of personal and professional reasons. So we wanted to stay up in the region. So Sheffield is very close to Manchester, where I did my degree, and my partner was working in Manchester at the time.
Great.
But also my third year undergraduate project supervisor knew my PhD supervisor in Sheffield well, and so recommended the project because it was in a related area on kind of the biomechanics of plant cell walls, and gave me a good reference. So I applied for it, and initially I didn't get it, and then there was another project available and I got it on the second swing. So it was a bit of luck, but really, I was just looking for plant science related projects that were interesting, and there was a lot of different projects at the time that interested me, but this one was about something related to my third year project, so I felt I had a little bit to offer to it.
Yeah.
So went for it.
So currently you're working on cell plant, cell wall and all those things. So during your PhD, you did the same thing?
Yes, in a different system. So I worked in my PhD on very specifically the kind of nano biomechanics of stomatal cell walls, and then I've kept some of those techniques and taken them forward in my career, but I've sort of broadened that out to look at cell walls in other contexts and kind of broaden that research strand.
Oh, great. So during your postdoc, because after your PhD, I have seen your track, like you moved, there was no any gap, like you have continuously flowed for, PhD, then postdoc, then the discovery fellow.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate.
So can you tell me briefly about like how is the journey from like a postdoc to now early careers, like a discovery fellow and all?
I'd say it's been quite a steep learning curve. So I was very fortunate. I finished my PhD and lined up a job in Leeds with a postdoc with Jocelyn Benitez Alfonso, was then doctor, is now professor. And I was very fortunate that she's an incredibly supportive supervisor. So she really encouraged me to develop my own ideas and apply for things. And she provided me with a lot of support for writing the Discovery Fellowship application.
Yeah.
And I was still living in Sheffield at the time from my PhD. So I had a vested interest in moving back to Sheffield. And I really like the department at Sheffield. They have really brilliant growth facilities, and there's just a really big group of plant scientists. So there's a lot of people to bounce ideas off. So I kind of wanted to be back in Sheffield.
Yeah.
And I just applied for it, and it was a really long process to write it. So I guess the first bit of advice would be start a year in advance of when you need it to start, because it took a long time to go through the interviews and the reviews.
Yeah. It's my personal question, is it when you're applying for independent fellowship, your profile really matter? Because sometimes you are leaving your PhD, you don't have that much profile, but we say you need some paper for large paper, big paper, something.
There's a mix. I would say yes, obviously your profile does matter, but I was not the most prolific PhD student. I had a nice paper for my PhD, and then in my postdoc we had a couple of small additional papers, but I did not have a huge CV with loads of big impact Nature science papers and loads of first author papers. So I think you need to have something to show that you can drive a research project through to a good publication, but field specific publications that are kind of lower impact I think are fine, and you've then just got to write a really good project that's really well articulated, that sells the problem well. And I think that's, as long as your CV is good enough, I think the project and how you present it and how you sell the idea is really more important.
Yeah. So it's like you can apply. It's not matter that you should have a Nature or something, but I think the area of interest where you're applying for the post, you working, when I see your work, it seems like you have moved from, but you haven't left that area of research, and it seems like you have grip on those subjects. When you're writing, people can see that this guy can bring something new.
Kind of build on your skill set. If you start something completely different, you have no track record on it, even if you've got papers in a different field.
So it's happened with me. I started with my MAP kind of signaling back in India. I did in microRNA biogenesis, then moved to glucose signaling, then go to ABS signaling, and later now I'm doing the simulation. So somehow I feel like there is no particular thing that I'm working, but I feel like I'm working on post-translational modification.
Yeah, exactly.
But thing is that when I feel like when I'm communicating and writing a grant for something, I feel like where I should focus rather than I don't have niche where I can go and say okay, I want to work over there. But it's a post-translational modification which makes sometimes it's hard for people. Other people also maybe thinking we have moved in multiple projects. That may be one of the reasons that their grant not successful.
Yeah, I think your grant has to be focused. Your proposal has to have, you can't try and incorporate everything that you've done, and it's fine to have developed some avenues of research that you've then not followed up on, because you still learn from that.
Yeah.
But it should build on something that you already know how to do. That might be methodology. You might apply existing methodology to a new system, or you might continue to ask the similar questions to you've asked in your postdoc, but take them in a slightly different direction.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to build on everything. You might have done a PhD and a postdoc in different fields, and it might only build on one of them, not on both of them. I think that's totally fine.
That's right. So if I say, I know postdoc is always sometimes very hectic to cope up with all this. You have 2 years of postdoc, there's insecurity that after 2 years what will happen because of your fund and all. So how do you deal with that one? If I have this 2 years, I have to give this data, but suddenly you don't know how much time it will take your research, because it's uncertainty in the work.
Yeah, I found the short-term nature of it quite tricky at times, and I think you've got to be really careful to prioritize the most important strands, not the easiest wins. So it can be tempting to say, this experiment will only take me 2 days to get the results, I'll do that. And then you do another experiment and another one. But actually, sometimes the most important thing that's actually going to be key for the paper, you put it off, but that might take 8 months to do. So you need to get that started. But I think at all career stages. Now I've got my own independent position. You still feel like you're juggling a lot of things and you're prioritizing, and there's still a lot of pressure and time frames to get things done and get funding in. So that doesn't go away, it just evolves. So I think that pressure time of the postdoc is kind of teaching you how to deal with those pressures and how to manage multiple threads at once and how to prioritize.
Yeah.
You do need to be able to do that to a certain extent to run a research group, I think.
Yeah. So it's totally different, not different. Yeah, it's totally different, like as a postdoc and as a independent PI, because in the independent, you have to take care of your projects, your, tenure to complete and all those things. But as a postdoc, we have different perspective. Because I'm a postdoc, I'm focusing on that because I don't know what will be the...
Yeah, I think the pressures evolve and are different, but certainly with the postdoc, it's the instability, I think, is
insecurity,
the hardest bit, because if you don't get stuff through to publication, it can be quite challenging. And I'm still trying to push out a publication from my postdoc because I didn't get it finished within the postdoc, and then it's hard to find time.
Yeah,
and it's frustrating for me how long that's taken. It's frustrating for my PI in Leeds how long that's taken, and we're really trying to push it out. And I'm afraid there's no easy fix for it. It's just hard. But I think real careful prioritization of what is going to get me, what's the minimum I need to get a paper out of this? Do that, get the paper, kind of get an output. Yeah,
prioritize the things what is needed, not rather than exploring every aspect and you're ending with nothing in your hand.
And don't save everything up for that hypothetical Nature paper. Obviously, if you've got a really big story, you might want to try for that big impact journal.
But at the same time,
get something out.
Yeah, it's sometimes I feel like in the same time when you're aiming for high papers, but you have to be realistic upon your work, what you're doing, because sometimes you can't say this paper is going to be in the higher impact journal. You have to be open up with like, okay, if I'm doing these things, if it's a novelty, let's try it. But sometimes you can't say, okay, I can stay for more 1 year, I can try. That can drive like a 3 or 4 years. You're ending with not the high impact, but 4 years spent, you got one. So sometimes I feel like we spend more time in the postdoc and our publication drops. That's also negative for the career. Like in the future, if you're applying for some kind of independent fellowship, because in 3 years, what you got is like this impact factor.
Yeah, I think there's a real balance. And I think it's quite damaging for science, the obsession with impact factor that we've generated. And it doesn't lead, I think, to the best science.
Best practices, yeah, that's right.
But I do think there's different scales of impact, and you do need your publications to go to a good, rigorous journal that's respected in your field.
Yeah.
But I think it's far more useful for your career to have a slightly smaller paper, but that you very clearly lead on, than maybe be one of many authors on a huge paper. Because one of the big things about transitioning from the postdoc stage into an independent stage is being able to demonstrate your independence and your leadership, and that's very hard. No one gets a Nature paper on their own. Those papers have 20 authors, so it can become quite hard to demonstrate your independence and your contribution.
And certainly sometimes it may help you as a teamwork. You can say like you can work in a team. That's good for like postdoc, because you can work in multiple projects. Because when you join a lab, you don't have to work on one project, rather than you have to supervise sometimes PhD, sometimes master, and something like that. So that can define like you can work in a team. But ultimately, like you said, small paper also matter because you laid them by your own self and you come to that one. And small paper again can add multiple things, like, and finally you can say that you can lead the big project as well. Because as early career, we cannot apply for the big grant first of all, but like a small grant we can apply. Like for me, like I'm looking for like a next one. What will be either independent fellowship, which I can take it, because when I apply for the postdoc now, I spent 3 or 4 years here in Durham, and I apply for the job which doesn't have the criteria of my salary according to that, and I feel like they won't be taking because they have mentioned this one and like this one the salary range. So I sometimes feel like either you have to approach in such a way, either independent fellowship you apply for together, so that will be more entertaining rather than I will go for like open post and where they have mentioned already like we have this range. So I feel, what do you suggest?
I think that's a very personal decision, but certainly the independent fellowship gives you a bit more freedom to set your own parameters for every aspect of the job. You kind of have a little bit more freedom to set your salary, although still within institutional boundaries, and you've got a lot more freedom on the direction of the project. But it is a lot of work to put a fellowship together, and obviously the success rate is low because they're very competitive. So there's pros and cons. I think if you can get a fellowship, they're fantastic. They really give you time to develop your ideas and your independence, while you don't have, say, as a lecturer, you've got teaching constraints as well, but you don't have that so much as an early career fellow. So if you can get them, they're amazing, but obviously they're competitive, and there's plenty of brilliant scientists that don't get independent fellowships, and I think it's important that they still try and go for lecturer jobs and things, because you don't need a fellowship to move into a lecturer position. Plenty of people still don't.
So recently I was applying for like a assistant professor in India, and they have criteria for different, like if you're applying for assistant professor, you have to be like master or PhD, no more experience. But associate professor, maybe 5 years after PhD, you have to have experience of this one, or industrial experience, or teaching experience. I came to like teaching experience. In UK, I don't know how many postdocs go for teaching, because they don't allow sometimes, like you have to work. So somehow you're not developing yourself as a looking for like assistant professor or lecturer or something, because they will ask, do you have experience? But no, because during the PhD you just went for demonstrating and experiment, not like a teaching on. So I feel like that's missing in.
I think that's a very good point, and I should say my experience is very UK centric, because I've only worked in the UK system, and I've got family ties here, so I'm not planning to move outside the UK system. So it's not something I'd considered, because if you're a postdoc applying for lecturer jobs in the UK, there's no real expectation that you've done a significant amount of teaching, because that's what the system in the UK is.
So it's working like that.
It's a challenge for kind of other job markets that have different expectations that I hadn't considered. I think there are opportunities at postdoc to teach often. For example, I don't know what it's like here in Sheffield. We have modules that have got like teaching focused staff on them, but then we have research focused guest lectures in those modules to give the students exposure to kind of research led stuff, and we sometimes have postdocs delivering those. And so then you've got kind of examples of giving lectures and running practicals and things like that.
Yeah, that's really wonderful, because here I feel like PhD scholars can opt for the demonstrator because they can be paid for that one. And that's good. But as a postdoc, sometimes we feel like we haven't got any chances for like, interaction with the undergrad, or like a teaching experience you can include. But sometime, like if there is a module where you can give a seminar, so we approach over there, they will be not paying for that, but at least we are getting the experience for like interaction with the students that may help you in later. Because suddenly when I'm applying for this job, I can say at least, I have worked for with a master and all, but not completely like a lectureship or something, like for 1 month or something. But there is a 1 or 2 class I have taken for this one. That's includes.
I think giving a couple of guest lectures here or there gives you can spin that to be quite a lot on your CV if you need to.
So I will come back to your as an independent researcher. How do you unwind yourself when you working in the lab or the office and applying for grants and all? How do you unwind yourself?
So I mean, I have a 2-year-old at home, so there's not a lot of relaxing, but because she is manic. But I try and be quite boundaried, and I think I try and not to let work bleed into personal life too much. Sometimes I do have to do a little bit of work in the evening and the weekends, but for the most part, my work day is when I work, and then when I go home, my laptop stays at work or it's in my bag, and I don't think about it. And I tell people in my lab that they won't get any response from me over the weekend, but I also won't be emailing them over the weekend. And try not to think about work in a work way. I think about science still, because I'm interested in science, but spend time with my family and kind of have the weekend to do whatever I want to do. Go and see friends. I've got an allotment. I go and garden. Take time away from work. And then also in work, I try and give myself time to think. So if you're constantly doing little jobs here and there, you never think. And I sometimes just try and give myself an hour where I'll go and sit in a coffee shop and just with a notebook and just take some notes, think about with no computer, so you're not distracted by emails or finishing of a job, just sketching out ideas.
Yeah.
But crucially, that's work. So that happens in the work day. I'm thinking and I'm planning. So it's a work job. So it happens in the work day.
That's right. I also, like you said, like I carry this notebook with me if I'm distracted too much with my work, because whenever I'm looking at my laptop, I start doing like, oh, I have to work this one. Then I realize, oh, I have to apply for my postdoc position. So all the time I'm like switching from one to another.
Yeah.
So, and it's like you can do it, but because you're just good typing like, oh, postdoc position in UK. You're moving, but you're not focusing. And 1 hour I will spend and I will be like too much distressed. So I feel like you said, go to coffee shop, I mostly go to here. The Durham is really nice place, it's like a nice garden. You can go and just sit over there and just listen to the music and relax. So yeah, that's a good
there's a lot of evidence about how constant task switching basically reduces how much you're able to focus on a thing. And so every time you task switch, you're losing focus, and you're not regaining that when you switch back. So you lose productivity. So better to try and carve out kind of bits of time for those sorts of important jobs without being distracted.
If I ask you, like, how it's different now, because as a postdoc, all the time I'm thinking about my work. It's like, you have to bring that work before your contract ends. But as a PI, you know that you have to carry on, but you have to also focus on your personal life and work balance, something like that. But is it different, like how you did when you were doing postdoc?
I always tried to be quite boundaried. I feel like now that I kind of lead people in a lab, I try and set a good example of having work-life balance, because I feel like those sorts of things have to come from the top. If your PI works all the time and is always in it, the expectation bleeds onto your postdocs and PhDs, and I don't have that expectation of them. I think I am still thinking about stuff a lot of the time. It's just what I think about's different. Before I was thinking about finishing that experiment. Now I'm thinking about, do I have time to go into the lab? I have to write that lecture. Shall I submit a grant? But I'm also thinking about trying to keep on top of the PhD students project so that when I speak to them, I know what they're doing and they don't feel like I'm out of touch with their project. So it's kind of, it's better and worse. There's more things to think about, but then also I know that the students are doing some of the thinking as well, because they're managing their own project to a certain extent. So yeah, it's kind of similar, but with nuances, I would say.
So how do you explain, because I was working with the research culture, so we were talking about like what kind of what do you think about the research culture according to your personal view? Because as a work ethic, most of the time we are like, okay, you are working on, so sometimes you spend extra time, Saturday, Sunday, people are working day and night. That's good for some time, because this is demanding for this week only, not for like a whole year. How do you think about this toxic culture or something?
I think it's very, very hit and miss. I think different places, but also within a place, different people have healthier or less healthy attitudes. And I think it's a reasonable expectation with the way science works that it's not always 9 to 5, but if someone's got an experiment that, say, runs late or runs over the weekend, I think it's a perfectly fair expectation that you take that time back the following week or the next month or whenever time lets up. And what you can't allow to happen is that feeling of busy to elongate and be constant, especially when you've got PhDs and postdocs that you're managing. As a manager, I think it's the PI's responsibility to manage those pressures and to take some of that pressure. So when I was working with Jocelyn in Leeds, we had a meeting and she said to me once, she's like, I can see that you're stretched too thin. I think you're stretching yourself too far and you're going to burn yourself out. We need to rejig this workload. And she had that kind of, and initially I didn't respond very well because I felt like she was criticizing me. She wasn't. She was protecting me. And she was saying, no, I can see that you're doing too many things and you're not having time to rest. And I need to take some off you. And I think that's the PI's job. And I think some PIs will naturally do that better than others. And I think it's important that institutions have a set of minimum expectations that they enforce with their PIs, and there's clear pathways for people in those groups if those expectations are not being met to raise them.
Yeah.
But I think there's lots of progress on research culture, certainly in the UK, but there's still also plenty of negatives.
Yeah.
But I think it's often overlooked that there's lots of negatives in other fields as well. I have friends that work in kind of the tech sector, and there's all sorts of toxic cultures there. Not saying that's an excuse, but I think sometimes academia is maybe unfairly demonized for not being better than other jobs when it's actually just the same as other jobs.
Yeah, that's right. We are coming to our end of this podcast. However, I will ask if you have any suggestions for the undergrad or postdoc or as an early career scientist. What do you give them?
I would say don't expect everything to run smoothly and to work. Certainly when you get into kind of lab projects and research projects, stuff goes wrong, or you don't get results that you expect, or you get conflicting results. And if you get disheartened by that, that's going to happen throughout your whole career. You've really got to learn to manage that and be kind of resilient. And sometimes that might turn into a win.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's just a bad avenue and you have to change tack.
Yeah.
But learning to deal with that, I think, gives you the resilience to carry on.
Yeah, most of the time, like I'm saying my personal view, because when I work on something, I put myself in that work, and suddenly you realize it's not working, and I'm spending 1 month or 6 months. Sometimes I feel like it's like my personal view, like, is it worth to come to the science? Like, it's like, you're questioning yourself, and sometimes you don't find answer from or support from other people, because these things sometimes you can't discuss with the people, even your friend, because they will, oh, Prakash, come on, you are not doing enough. Maybe people think like that way, right? So how do you you're gonna suggest, like, if you come to this point, I suggest myself, like, you're doing science, that it won't be hard. First thing, you won't be getting the experiment one day and you get the data, you will be happy, but stick over there. But sometimes I feel very negative for myself. It's like,
I think that's tough, and there's a lot of imposter syndrome in science, where people that are really good think that they're not very good. But if you were in industry would have lots of checkpoints where they say, right, if we've not achieved this by then,
we can't proceed.
We leave this. If we've not achieved this by then, or we need these to work for this to be a viable avenue. And I think sometimes in academia we get a little bit too emotionally attached to the work because we find it fascinating and we're interested in it, and it's cool, and you want to address the question, but it's not always a good use of mental resources. And I think building in the checkpoints early. So I during my PhD I had a big AFM, atomic force microscopy project, and it was really challenging, and there was an element of it that we ended up abandoning. But we decided before we even started it, we were like, right, if we've not achieved this by this point, we're going to move on because we don't have time. So it means when we hadn't, it wasn't like a shock to me, because I knew that was what we were building to, and I knew we had an end point as well. So I think if we built those in, it makes it a little bit easier, but it's always hard to let go of a bit of a research project that you feel a lot of affection for. But sometimes it's for the best, and an experiment not working isn't a reflection on the researcher's ability. Sometimes experiments are just not tractable, or the hypothesis is wrong, but it was the best hypothesis at the time, or we don't have the technology yet. Maybe in 10 years there'll be a new tool and that'll be easier.
That's right. All right, so thank you, Sam, for coming to our podcast. Before ending, can you say something for your group? If somebody wants to join your group as a PhD or postdoc, say anything?
Well, actually, I'd be looking for PhD students to work on. Well, there's a bit of flexibility actually, but around cell wall development in plants or fungi, and the role of that in pathogenicity and in stress responses, and I'll be looking at that towards the end of this year, looking for students. So if people are interested for PhD, it'll be on my Twitter, which is @Sam Amsbury, AMSBURY, and I'm hoping to get postdoc funding soon, and so again, postdoc will be advertised through the same.
That's great. So thank you so much, Sam, for coming, and all the best for your career.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.
Bye.